I've been taking the time to break down what a subject to deal is. Now, let me give you the 5 things it is not. Now, to remind you, a subject to deal is when a seller sells a property subject to the existing loan staying in place. So the title transfers from the seller to the buyer, but the loan that the seller has, that stays in place. And the buyer makes the payments on their behalf. Now, let's break it down. So the first thing that is important to keep in mind that subject to is that subject to is not an assumption of a mortgage. This is the most common misconception about subject to deals. Now, to remind you, an assumption is where a buyer would go formally qualify for the loan and they would be able to tackle basically inherit, assume, that's the better word, assume the low interest rate. So if a seller has a 3% interest rate that you can't go get right now, they can go through the process to assume that, but they're going to have to formally qualify, bring their credit score, their W-2, their tax returns, all of that to the table with the lender. Now, keep in mind that not all loans are assumable, but every single loan can be taken subject to. Now, with that being said, there is a level that I like to remind people with the subject to, there's two relationships. There's a relationship with the seller and their lender. That's where they sign the mortgage, they commit to making payments, they tie their credit to it, all of those things. And then there is the relationship between the seller and the buyer. But the buyer in a subject to transaction never formally makes a relationship with the lender. They may have paperwork to talk to the lender, to navigate things with the lender, but it's never a formal relationship. They're not asking permission, and they're definitely not applying like in the scenario with an assumption. So, first point here, a subject to is not an assumption. When I hear an attorney call it an assumption, it reminds me or if I hear like a realtor or seller or something like that, an investor call it reminds me that there's some more education to be done on the topic, because if someone thinks it's an assumption, that is a gross misunderstanding, and we want to make sure that we're helping people make informed decisions, as well as our team, right? Like we want them to be informed in doing these deals with us. All right. So the second thing that subject to is that it's not illegal. Now, a lot of people, especially who are not familiar with it, namely, I see this a lot between real estate professionals such as realtors or real estate agents, lenders, and attorneys. And so a lot of times what I do is when they call it out, they say, hey, subject to is illegal. You can't do that. One of the easiest ways that I send it, that I kind of, I help educate them. And guys, if you're trying to educate someone, trust me, I've gotten blocked before. I've gotten, my comments deleted because people sometimes either don't want to hear the truth, or you, and even if I try to go about it the nicest way possible, right? So let's just first educate ourselves, right? Is that one of the first and easiest things that I do is I send them the link to a HUD 1 from the HUD.gov website. So a HUD 1 statement is used to balance out a closing, right? So whenever you sell a property, and one side is for a seller, one side is for the buyer, and they do all the plus and minuses for all the fees, and everything that has to happen in a transaction. HUD 1s are most commonly used by attorneys and title companies. And I point to line 203 and line 503 in the HUD 1. And I say, first of all, I did not call HUD, and they did not put this on there just for me. This has been there for a long time. Why would they put something on a federal document if it was illegal? Truly. And that usually resolves the case. When with attorneys, I usually will point out, I've got actually about 12 to 15 law books in my study. I'll usually pull one of the the property, the real estate law and title books, and I'll pull it up. I say, hey, this is not under the mortgage fraud section. Let's talk through it. And then for real estate agents, I will pull up so like I actually have it right here. This right here is in Louisiana. I'm not a licensed agent. I did go take the class, And so I actually pull up the section where it teaches about subject to, and again, it's not underneath the mortgage fraud section. And so it's under the title conveyance. And so with that being said, I just remind them that just because you're unfamiliar with it doesn't mean it's illegal. That's a very common issue, but it is not illegal. It is absolutely something that can be done. There's things that ultimately, when it comes down to it, people, a very common creative um, concept is a confused mind says no, or a confused or unfamiliar mind says that's illegal. And so keep that in mind. And so that's part of why I do education, right? It's because I want people to be better educated, and I come with the facts, I come with the receipts, the things that can back it up. All right, so number two of the thing that subject to isn't is that it is not illegal. So number three, this is one that is important to keep in mind, is that subject to is not a strategy for all sellers. As much as I know buyers of subject to deals would want to believe this, I'm a firm believer that there are sellers who are not the right fit for this. I also believe that subject to should not be the first option that every seller considers. I honestly believe that it is a good last resort option, and then it's one that every seller should make as an informed, decision. With that being said, if they don't understand the risk, well, when they properly understand the risk, that's when it is a good correlation of why it should be more of a last resort option. Because when someone considers it, as a first option, especially if they have a ton of time and a ton of equity to explore other options, that generally tells me they may not understand the risk, that the risk may not be being presented to them, because it's not one of those things where, oh, this is just a great way for me to get, additional money. And although sometimes you can, in relation to the risk, it's one of those things that people should consider. Again, don't rob someone of an informed decision. So that's my belief there. It's not a strategy all sellers should consider, especially if they have heightened risk, like their job is more at risk if they were to have missed payments, stuff like that. So number four, something that subject to is that it's not a strategy for all buyers. And again, as much as the industry and TikTok and clickbait would love for me to say everyone should do subject to, it's not. So, for example, because there's more responsibility with the subject to deal, as well as more moving parts, buyers should understand the risk involved with it. And then there's some buyers who are risk averse, so they don't like the additional risk. There's some buyers who, the additional moving parts is just too complicated for them. They would not rather, the headaches. I'll be very honest, a subject to deal is easily one of my most headache prone transactions. And then, the more responsibility. So, for example, if a buyer doesn't care about making their own payments on time, they should not be doing a subject to deal where they are committing to making someone else's payments on time on their behalf, right? Like that should just be logic. So if someone's struggling to pay their own bills, that should be a red flag. The second part of that is if the buyer, for example, as an investor, is one repair or one vacancy away from missing a payment, meaning they don't have extra cash for reserves, and if a water heater goes out or this month the tenant doesn't pay, they're one payment away from they're now going to get behind the payment because their money is having to go elsewhere. That is also something that those buyers should be very careful, and they should not consider a subject to deal until they can at least they have a little bit of extra cash to go towards whether it's repairs or vacancies, and not get behind on payments. um, this is a strategy that has more responsibility. Um, Again, it would get me more views, more likes, and more followers if I said that subject to is for every buyer and every seller. But I like to try to keep it real, and I wouldn't be able to lay my head down at night if I didn't, share those thoughts, right? And so then number five, is that additionally, this is another controversial topic of things that subject to is not, is that it's not a strategy you should wholesale. And again, there's a lot of people who teach this in the real estate investor space. And I truly believe that the majority of people um, who are wholesaling these deals, although they may have good intentions, number one, may not doing them correctly, and then they don't realize the level of risk that they're inserting into their business. So for the least amount of pay, right? So when you're wholesaling a deal, you generally, especially a wholesaling a subject to deal, it you will generally make the least amount of money. For example, if you wholesale the deal versus taking it down, there's other ways that you can collectively make money, because then you also add the time factor, right? So over time, owning a property that you buy subject to, you make more money, between the monthly cash flow, the appreciation, the amortization, like all of those things, the depreciation, all those things, that the wholesale fee for the least amount of money in the transaction, you are inserting the most amount of risk, because then you no longer in control. And so I don't believe it that subject to deals, creative deals in general, should be wholesaled. At the end of the day, I truly believe that this is going to be something that will cause regulation in the investor industry. And I'm not for it. For a long time, I've kind of said, I don't know about all that. I don't care. I don't think people should be doing that. I've kind of said it behind closed doors and in one-on-one conversations. But in the past year or two, I've started saying it more vocally on my socials, because it is getting to the point where the majority of people making subject to offers are doing so to wholesale it. And I cannot, at this point, I have worked for sure over 2 dozen failed subject to deals, and so there's a level there that there's a lot more risk that comes involved when someone is wholesaling. There's additional risk for a seller, and there's additional risk for the wholesaler, because at the end of the day, how do you know that that buyer knows the additional responsibility and the additional moving parts required to navigate a subject to deal? How do you know that they're not one vacancy, one repair away from missing the payment themselves, right? Show me someone that's vetting for that, right? Because at the end of the day, if an investor is wholesaling a subject to deal to someone who doesn't make their own payments on time, again, that is something there that I truly believe that that is a problem in the real estate investor community. I would go as far as to say that that is currently a plague that is hurting the investor community. And at the end of the day, do I believe that the investors who are doing it generally have good intentions? Yes. But a lot of times I think it's one-sided intentions. It's not saying, looking at the full picture. And do I think it's a well-informed opinion or a strategy? I don't think that, because a lot of times people see wholesaling as a low risk, no skin in the game transaction. I would agree generally on a cash deal, that's the case, not on a long-term creative deal. And so that is something that I think is the missing piece. Again, the guru selling courses on these topics, such as wholesaling, subject to deals, things like that. They're not talking about this. So I do think it's important to keep it in mind. So let's repeat these things. The 5 things subject to is not: it is not an assumption of a mortgage. It is not illegal. It is not a strategy that every seller should consider. And it is also not a strategy for every buyer. And then lastly, it is not a strategy that should be wholesaled. These are my 5 thoughts of what subject to is not. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. At the end of the day, I want you to be better educated, because when we know better, we can do better. And at the end of the day, there's still plenty of ways to make money through subject to transactions. There's plenty of ways to make money in real estate, but I want you to do so well informed and understanding the risk, and being able to get out there and do good business, because how you do real estate matters. Thanks, you guys, for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't already. This is one video a day for the first 100 days of 2025. Just chipping away at them. Thanks, guys.